If you're new here, I'm Matthew. This is Dark Ascent. Every single person in this episode had one thing in common. They were warned, but didn't care. From a blogger who kept walking even after being warned about that exact cave entrance, to a hiker who cut off trail onto a frozen scree field, past 2 active closures, which turned out to be exactly as unstable as the signs said it was. It was October 3rd, 2013. The Central Oregon coast near Cape Perpetua was deep into its fall swell season. Wave heights averaging 10 to 14 feet, with surge activity inside the coastal cave systems running far higher than anything you'd see in summer. Several cave access points along the Headland Trail had informal rope barriers and posted warnings put up by local trail volunteers in place since late September. Tamsin Vorhel was 45. A travel blogger from Eugene, Oregon. She made her living documenting outdoor destinations, trails, coastlines, hidden spots most people never found. She had visited this stretch of coast once before, during summer when the water was calm and the caves were accessible. That single visit seemed to be the entire basis of her confidence. She had no technical understanding of tidal surge behavior, no knowledge of how enclosed cave systems amplify wave energy, and no real reason to be there that day beyond wanting content for a post she was working on. She drove out alone, camera in hand, and had already decided the closures were an overreaction before she even got out of the car. Sea caves along this part of the Oregon coast are deceptive. The cave mouths face outward toward open water, and on the surface the ocean can look relatively settled, even when a surge set is building offshore. Inside the cave, the geometry changes everything. The walls narrow, the ceiling drops, and the incoming water has nowhere to go but forward and up. Surge events in these formations can push 40 feet or more into the cave interior in a matter of seconds, with enough force to move a person like debris. I've covered water-related deaths before, and the ones that happen in enclosed spaces are always the ones that move fastest. A volunteer doing a routine trail check happened to be near the barrier that morning. He had already noted a surge pushing 30 feet into that specific cave entrance earlier during his check. When Tamsin approached the rope barrier, he told her directly that conditions were dangerous and that the closure was active. She didn't engage with it seriously. She ducked under the rope and moved down the rocky approach toward the cave entrance without looking back. Which makes me wonder, at what point does someone hear a warning like that and still decide they know better? She wasn't uninformed. She was told clearly by someone standing right in front of her. She just didn't care. She made it approximately 35 feet inside the cave before the surge hit. There's no dramatic buildup with these events. The water doesn't announce itself. It rises fast from below and drives forward with compressive force that most people have never experienced and can't physically brace against. The wave pushed 40 feet into the cave. She was lifted off her feet and thrown into the back wall with significant force. The impact alone, her body against wet rock at that velocity, was enough to fracture ribs on her left side and cause pulmonary contusion to the underlying lung tissue. The water receded. 18 seconds later, a second surge came through and pulled her back toward the cave mouth, where she became lodged face down in a narrow rock channel at the base of the entrance, partially submerged in pooled water. The volunteer witnessed the first surge from the trail above and called for help within 2 minutes. Responders couldn't enter immediately. Active tidal conditions made access dangerous, and they had to wait for a lull between surge sets before anyone could safely move in. It took approximately 2 hours and 10 minutes from the time of the call before her body could be reached. I think about that window a lot. 2 hours where nothing could be done, and everyone knew it. Tamsin Vorhel was found face down in the rock channel, partially submerged. The cause of death was drowning. The blunt thoracic trauma from the initial wall impact, the rib fractures, and pulmonary contusion was listed as a contributing factor, as the lung injury would have severely compromised her ability to keep her airway clear during the receding surge. She was likely incapacitated before the water even pulled her back out. The case was ruled an accidental death. The volunteer's trail log from that morning documented the earlier surge activity and his direct warning to her before she entered. That record became the primary basis for the official findings. Her camera was recovered intact in a tidal pool near the cave mouth, the last image timestamped 4 minutes before the surge. It was July 22nd, 2015. The Shoshone National Forest in northwestern Wyoming sits directly against the eastern boundary of Yellowstone. one of the densest grizzly bear habitats in the contiguous United States. The backcountry trail system there sees moderate foot traffic on its front miles, but thins out fast once you push past the first few hours in. By mile 11, you are genuinely remote. Cell service is gone, terrain is dense, and wildlife activity is constant in summer. It is not a place that forgives poor decisions quietly. Corell Hutchins was 38, a real estate agent from Billings, Montana. She was the loudest in her group of 4, quickest to dismiss concerns, and the only one who showed up to an 11-mile grizzly country backpacking trip without bear spray. She had done a handful of overnight trips before and carried that experience like it was more than it was. I've seen this pattern enough times to recognize it immediately. Someone with just enough exposure to feel confident but not enough to actually be careful. Grizzly bears in the Shoshone backcountry are not a rare or theoretical presence. In summer, they are actively feeding, building fat reserves before fall, and they are highly territorial around food sources. A bear that has claimed a carcass will stay close to it, sometimes for days, and will treat anything that enters that radius as a threat. That's not aggression in the way most people imagine it. That's just how they operate. On day 2, the group came across a partially consumed elk carcass roughly 40 yards off the trail. The smell alone should have been enough. The others recognized it immediately. An active food cache, which meant an active bear, likely close. They wanted to reroute. Corell called it an overreaction and kept pushing. That evening at camp, the others hung their food properly. She left scraps near her tent, wrapper residue, food odor on her cooking gear. Nothing packed out the way it should have been. That campsite was essentially an open invitation, and something accepted it. A grizzly entered camp at approximately 5:40 a.m. the following morning. The others were awake but still inside their tents, staying still, which is the correct response. Corell unzipped her tent and stepped outside, likely disoriented from sleep. The bear turned toward her the moment she emerged. She backpedaled, caught her foot on a tent stake, and went down. The bear closed the distance in under 4 seconds. The first bite came down on her left shoulder, tearing through the trapezius muscle and fracturing the clavicle. It dragged her approximately 12 feet across the ground, released, then drove its jaws into the left side of her neck. The bite lacerated the left internal jugular vein and caused direct traumatic injury to the surrounding carotid region. That kind of blood loss doesn't give you much time. It is rapid, it is not controllable in a field setting, and it is fatal without immediate surgical intervention that was never going to happen 11 miles into the backcountry. The bear re-engaged briefly before leaving the camp on its own. The full attack lasted under 2 minutes. I've gone over the timeline of that morning more than once. Every decision she made in the 18 hours before that attack made the outcome more likely, not less. One of the other campers had a satellite communicator. The distress signal went out at 5:53 a.m. The group was 11 miles from the nearest trailhead through dense terrain with no direct access route. Help reached them after 4 hours and 45 minutes, which, given the location, was actually fast. Corell was still alive when the others reached her, but lost consciousness within minutes and did not regain it. She was unresponsive well before responders arrived. Cause of death was exsanguination. The internal jugular laceration produced blood loss that moved faster than anything her companions could have slowed with the gear they had on them. Contributing factors were straightforward. No. Bear spray, food mismanagement at camp, and direct exposure by exiting the tent during an active bear encounter. A grizzly matching the track pattern and the size profile was identified in the surrounding area in the days following. No further action was taken regarding the bear. GPS track data recovered from one of the other campers' devices showed the group's route passing directly alongside the carcass site the previous afternoon, a logged record of exactly where they were and when. The case was ruled accidental. No further inquiry was opened. It was August 9th, 2018. Theodore Roosevelt National Park in western North Dakota was at peak summer visitation. The south unit of the park holds several free-roaming bison herds that move unpredictably across open grassland and frequently cross through visitor areas without warning. Signs posted throughout the park are explicit. Maintain a minimum distance of 75 feet from all bison at all times. That number exists for a reason. Preska Dunwall was 52. A retired school teacher from Fargo, North Dakota. She wasn't a stranger to the park. She'd visited twice before, but somewhere along the way she had developed a habit of pushing boundaries for better photos. Her daughter had argued with her about it before this trip, which tells me this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a pattern. She carried a point-and-shoot camera and had no formal wildlife safety awareness beyond what she assumed was common sense, which, as it turns out, wasn't enough. Bison are not domesticated animals performing for visitors. They are wild, unpredictable, and have been responsible for more injuries in national parks than any other animal. What makes them particularly dangerous is that their pre-charge behavior is subtle. A dropping head, a squared stance, a short bluff step forward, and by the time most people recognize those signs, the animal is already moving. At a full charge, a bison covers ground at roughly 35 miles per hour. That's about 51 feet every second. I think a lot of people picture bison as slow, heavy, almost passive, and that assumption is exactly what gets them hurt. A herd of roughly 14 bison was grazing near a pullout area that morning. Other visitors kept their distance, staying well behind the marked boundary. Preska moved past it. She closed to about 18 feet from the nearest bull, adjusting her angle for a better shot. Her daughter called out to her twice. A nearby visitor told her to back up. She waved them both off. It's the daughter detail that gets me every time I go through a case like this. Someone who knew her, who had argued with her about this exact behavior before, watching it happen anyway, and not being able to stop it. At 18 feet, she was well inside the margin where retreat becomes irrelevant. Even if she had turned and run the moment the bull moved, the numbers don't work in her favor. 18 feet at 51 feet per second leaves no functional window to escape. What I find difficult to get past is that every single person around her saw it coming. Her daughter, the nearby visitor, probably others in that pullout watching from a safe distance. Everyone except her. The bull's head dropped, its stance squared. She either didn't recognize it or didn't react in time. The bull covered 18 feet in under 2 seconds. The first impact was a direct horn strike to her lower left abdomen, penetrating trauma to the abdominal wall with vascular and bowel involvement consistent with the depth and angle of the strike. The force of the charge lifted her off the ground. She came down hard on her back. As the bull moved through, it trampled across her right leg, fracturing the femur, and a second contact point landed across her lower rib cage before the herd shifted and the animal moved off. The entire sequence lasted under 10 seconds. Her daughter and several other visitors witnessed all of it. I've read through enough of these to know that 10 seconds is about as fast as these situations go, and somehow it's always the ones with witnesses that are the hardest to process. Multiple people called for help at the same time. A ranger unit already in the south unit reached the scene in approximately 14 minutes. Preska was conscious when they arrived, but in severe pain, showing physical signs consistent with significant abdominal trauma, guarded positioning, and labored breathing. She was transported to a regional trauma center as quickly as the location allowed. She died on the operating table approximately 4 hours after the goring. The left iliac artery laceration was the primary fatal injury. Blood loss during transport and into surgery was significant and ultimately uncontrollable. The bowel perforation added surgical complexity, but was secondary to the vascular injury as the cause of death. Femur fracture and rib injuries were noted as additional findings. Witness statements from her daughter and 3 other visitors provided a consistent account of the sequence, where she was standing, the warnings she received, and the full charge. Those statements, combined with the ranger's on-scene assessment, formed the basis of the official findings. No action was taken against the animal. The case was ruled an accidental death. If you've made it this far and you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. The next story starts at 10,000 feet and only gets worse from there. It was September 6, 2016. Mount Elbert in Lake County, Colorado is the highest peak in the Rocky Mountains, at 14,439 feet. In September, the mountain is past its safest summer window. Afternoon weather builds fast. Temperatures drop without much warning, and the trail conditions that felt manageable at dawn can look completely different by midday. The northeast ridge route was open, but advisories about altitude-related illness were posted at the trailhead, not suggestions. Advisories. There is a difference, and most people who end up in trouble on that mountain chose not to see it. Renly Okafor was 47, a fitness instructor from Denver, Colorado. She was physically fit, ran half marathons regularly, and had summited 2 other 14ers earlier that summer without issue. That track record seemed to be the entire basis of her confidence going into this climb. I've heard this before. Prior success at altitude does not guarantee the same outcome every time, and fitness level has very little to do with how your body responds to elevation. She came with a group of 3, but made clear from the start she intended to push her own pace. She had not acclimatized above 10,000 feet in the weeks leading up to the climb. Altitude doesn't care about fitness level. That's the part most people get wrong. The assumption is that if you're in good shape, your body will handle elevation. But acclimatization is a separate process entirely, and skipping it creates a physiological risk that no amount of cardio training compensates for. The danger is that the early warning signs overlap almost completely with normal exertion. A headache, some nausea, fatigue, which makes them easy to dismiss, especially in someone who is used to pushing through discomfort. Which makes me think, how many people have been on that mountain with those exact symptoms and just kept going, never knowing how close they were cutting it? The evening before the climb, at their campsite near the trailhead, Renly mentioned a mild headache and slight nausea. She attributed it to dehydration and went to sleep. The others suggested she take an extra rest day before attempting the summit. She declined. The symptoms she described that evening are textbook early-stage hop onset. Not dramatic, not definitive, but consistent enough that they should have changed the plan entirely. On the climb the following morning, around 12,200 feet, the headache returned stronger. A persistent dry cough developed, and her pace slowed noticeably. The others flagged it and suggested turning back. She told them she was fine, that they were overthinking it, and pushed ahead alone, separating from the group. By 13,400 feet, she had fallen well behind but was still moving. A separate group descending passed her somewhere in that stretch. They noted she looked pale, was breathing in short, labored bursts, and was moving slowly. They asked if she was okay. She told them she was fine. That exchange reminds me of the sea cave story earlier this episode. A completely different setting, but the same moment where someone had the chance to accept help and didn't. At approximately 13,800 feet, she sat down on a flat rock just off the trail. The descending group had already continued down, assuming she was resting. Her original group waited near the summit for roughly 25 minutes before starting back down. When she didn't appear, they found her slumped against a boulder, unresponsive. Her lips had a faint bluish tint. Her breathing was labored and gurgling, the kind of sound that in severe HAPE cases is audible without any equipment and leaves little room for interpretation. She had no pulse by the time they reached her. The prior evening symptoms, written off as dehydration, had been the beginning of a process that continued through the night and accelerated with every foot of elevation she gained that morning. I might have made the same call she did, written off a headache after a long drive and a day of hiking. I think most people would, but that's exactly what makes this one difficult to sit with. The group had a cell phone with partial signal. The call connected on the third attempt. Air response was grounded by deteriorating afternoon weather, and ground teams were dispatched instead, which accounts for the delay. Responders reached her approximately 2 hours and 50 minutes after the call. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death was high-altitude pulmonary edema, progressive fluid, accumulation in the lungs leading to respiratory failure, with onset likely beginning the prior evening and accelerating rapidly, with continued exertion above 13,000 feet. Contributing factors included failure to acclimatize, dismissal of early symptoms the night before, refusal to descend when the group flagged her condition, and solo separations at high elevation. The case was ruled accidental. Her phone was recovered with a GPS track log showing her pace dropping significantly between the 12,200 and 13,400 foot waypoints, a measurable record of her body slowing down long before she stopped moving entirely. A final location timestamp placed her at 13,810 feet, logged 34 minutes before her group found her. It was March 14th, 2014. Zion National Park in southern Utah was carrying the tail end of winter. Overnight temperatures had been dropping below freezing for weeks, and the freeze-thaw cycle had been working on the rock faces and scree fields throughout the backcountry in ways that aren't visible from the trail. A specific off-trail section near the Angels Landing corridor had an active closure marker posted at the approach, put in place because of documented unstable conditions in that area following the winter freeze cycle. Delvina Marsh was 41, a property manager from Scottsdale, Arizona. She drove up alone for a day hike, had completed the main Angels Landing route once before, and had decided that prior experience was sufficient qualification to ignore an active trail closure. Her goal was a lesser-known overlook she had found referenced on a hiking forum, not an official destination, not a marked route, but just a spot someone had posted about online. She came with trail runners instead of boots, no trekking poles, and a day pack that suggested she had not thought seriously about what the terrain might actually look like in March. I've seen this before, someone treating a winter backcountry approach like a summer day hike, and the gap between those two things is where these cases are born. Zion's geology is worth understanding here. The park sits on layers of Navajo sandstone, visually striking but structurally unpredictable in cold weather. The freeze-thaw cycle forces water into existing rock fractures, expands them overnight, and leaves surface rock in a state that looks stable but isn't. Scree fields in particular become significantly more dangerous after winter because the freeze-thaw process disrupts whatever natural settling had occurred. A rock that held weight in October may not hold it in March, which makes me wonder how many people walk onto those slopes every season without knowing any of that, and how many of them get lucky simply because nothing shifted under them. She passed 2 posted closure signs on her way in. Another hiker coming down the trail warned her directly that the route ahead was unstable and that the rock conditions were bad. She waved him off without breaking stride and kept going. What strikes me about that exchange is how ordinary it probably looked in the moment. A brief conversation on a trail, one person continuing on while the other walked away. No way for him to know what he was walking away from. She cut off trail onto a scree field to bypass a gated section of the route. The slope was steep, north-facing, and still partially frozen underneath the loose surface rock. She was approximately 2/3 of the way up the field when she stepped onto a cluster of flat rocks near the top. One shifted. That single movement pulled 3 others with it, and the cascade built from there. She lost her footing immediately, slid 6 feet across the moving surface, reached for a handhold that gave way, and went over a 58-foot sandstone ledge. She struck a narrow rock shelf at roughly the 30-foot mark. The impact there fractured her cervical spine at C5 to C6, an injury that would have rendered her immediately incapacitated and unable to brace for what came next. She hit the canyon floor seconds later. The final impact was the fatal event. The systemic trauma from that landing at that height onto sandstone was not survivable. A hiker on the canyon floor below heard the rock fall and saw debris land nearby but didn't locate her until he moved along the base of the wall toward the source of the sound. The hiker below called for help on a cell phone. The signal dropped twice before the call connected. Help arrived approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes after the fall. The terrain and the restricted nature of the area slowed access significantly. I think about that hiker a lot, standing at the base of that wall with nothing to do but wait. Delvina Marsh was found at the base of the ledge, partially covered by displaced rock. The canyon floor impact was identified as the cause of death, catastrophic blunt force polytrauma, consistent with a multi-impact fall from significant height. The cervical fracture sustained at the mid-fall shelf strike was a critical contributing injury, rendering her unable to control her body position for the final impact. Additional findings included a basilar skull fracture, shattered pelvis, a femur fracture, and diffuse internal hemorrhaging across the thoracic and abdominal cavities. The case was ruled accidental. GPS data recovered from her phone showed her route deviating off the main trail and led onto the scree field approach, and the hiker who found her provided a written account confirming the rockfall sound and debris pattern, both consistent with the physical evidence at the scene.